couple years ago, my wife Lisa and I went to Chicago. We needed to drop her mother and aunt off at Chicago O'Hare International Airport. And my wife had a brilliant idea. While we're in Chicago, let's go to IKEA. Well, you've probably been to an IKEA store, right? They're pretty much all over the country, really all over the world. IKEA stores would be the king of the stores when it comes to ready-to-assemble furniture, right? Anything you pick up at IKEA, you need to build yourself. So, those three ominous words are always attached to furniture that comes from IKEA. You know those three words, right? Some assembly required. Well, it took us the better part of a month to put this furniture together. You've seen these pieces if you've ever done IKEA stuff before, right? You need to bolt A to B, you need to connect C to D, and then you need to slide E over to F. Our marriage barely survived, but we actually got it done, as I said, in about a month. And all along, because we had all these leftover pieces, L, M, and N, we were praying that somehow, some way, our furniture would hold together. Life does come in pieces, though, right? Life is just kind of one big IKEA store, and it has all of these pieces that we're supposed to put together. And quite often, A doesn't bolt to B, and C doesn't connect to D, and sliding E over to F is absolutely impossible. It gets frustrating, we get mad, we get irritated, and very unhappy. M. Scott Peck famously wrote a book called The Road Less Traveled. Maybe you have read that book. It's been out now for about 40 years. But M. Scott Peck begins this book called The Road Less Traveled with three other words. Famously, he says, first sentence in the book, life is difficult. No kidding. Life is difficult. Life comes in a million pieces, and you got to put it together, and a lot of times it just doesn't fit. M. Scott Peck's premise in his whole book is if we don't accept the fact that life is difficult, we will be increasingly irritated and unhappy, and we'll walk around with a chip on our shoulder, and we will be blaming everybody for all our problems. Conversely, if we accept the fact that, you know what, life is difficult, that's a fact of life, then we'll be more emotionally mature. We'll be more relationally engaged, and we'll be a whole lot more happy. So if life is difficult, and it is, and quite often all the pieces don't fit together, then what do? We give the problem to Jesus. That's simple today. That's the simple spiritual truth. Give the problem to Jesus. It's simple, but it's not simplistic. There's a whole lot of depth involved in that. Give the problem, give the mess, give the pieces to Jesus. That's what Mary does. That's what Mary does. Many of you know, since Advent of late last year, we have declared this to be the year of John, right? We're looking at John's Gospel. We're looking at the book of Revelation. He wrote that too. We'll be looking at 1 John in the great months of September and October. But this being the Epiphany season, we're going to look at the 7 signs of salvation in John's Gospel. These 7 signs are all about a new creation. A new creation. Why is that? You may remember how John begins his gospel, right? In John 1, verse 1, in the beginning, which are the same words that begin the Bible, right? Genesis 1, verse 1, in the beginning. So it appears as though John is writing a new creation account. And he is. And so why are there 7 signs of salvation in John's gospel? Because those 7 signs correspond with the 7 days of creation. Genesis 1, get it? Do the math. The 7 days equal the 7 signs. And the first points to the first creation, and the 7 signs point to Christ's new creation. And this is a new creation of beauty and abundance and healing and resurrection and life. So in Epiphany, we're going to unpack all 7 signs. So let's begin with the first sign. Very familiar sign. The wedding at Cana in Galilee. And of course, this is the presenting problem in John chapter 2, verse 3. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." Someone underestimated the size of the crowd or the amount of thirst people would have. Someone maybe underestimated the number of friends Jesus would bring with him. Whatever the cause was of the problem, we've got a problem in River City. This wedding is going downhill fast. Now, when I speak with couples who are about to get married, I often tell them something like this. Don't freak out if things don't go perfectly. Weddings seldom go perfectly. The best man might forget the rings. The mother of the bride may show up 5 minutes late. And I've seen it once, if I've seen it 100 times. The flower girl has a major meltdown walking down the center aisle. So if that happens, I tell the couple, don't worry, it'll be just fine. But not at this wedding. Not at this wedding at Cana in Galilee when they've run out of wine. You need to understand, in first century Palestine, to run out of wine at a wedding celebration was a major social failure. You need to understand that first century Palestine, if you ran out of wine and food at a wedding, people could take out lawsuits against you. It is not okay. This is a problem of the highest proportion. They have no more wine. Well, what are you running out of this morning? Heat, right? Heat. Are you running out of ideas? Maybe you're running out of patience. Maybe it's January, right? You're running out of money. If you're a parent, chances are you have run out of all 3: ideas, patience, and money. Maybe you're running out of love. Maybe you're looking at your job and you're running out of enthusiasm and joy for the job. What are you running out of? What's your problem? What won't fit together this morning? What does Mary do when life is difficult for her? Let's take a look, shall we? First, Mary wasn't bossy. You ever get bossy when you're kind of irritated? Sure you do. So do I. You become CEO of the family, right? Well, Mary could have done something like this. Jesus, go down to the vineyard on the corner, accelerate the growth of the grapes, and turn them into wine. And do it now. Mary doesn't do that. Mary didn't try to fix things. You ever try to fix things when it's just a mess? Mary didn't try and become superwoman. Mary doesn't say, if it's going to be, it's up to me. No, not at all. Mary doesn't do that. Mary wasn't critical. You ever get critical of people when the pieces don't fit? Sure you do. Sure you do. I know you do. because I do too. Mary doesn't say, my gosh, what is the world coming to? Why couldn't this couple have planned ahead? It's all their fault that now we have no more wine. But Mary doesn't do that. Mary didn't blame Jesus. You ever blame God for your problems? I know you do. I know you do, because I do too. But Mary doesn't do that. Mary doesn't blame Jesus. She doesn't say, Jesus, if you're really the Mashiach, the anointed one, the Son of the Most High God, you wouldn't have let this happen. Mary doesn't do that. Mary didn't blame herself. Some of you, God bless you, you're always blaming yourself. It's always something that falls on your shoulders. Mary could have said something like, it's all my fault. I'm a miserable friend. If I would have been on top of my game, this wouldn't have happened. Now the marriage is a failure, and it's all on me. Mary doesn't do that. Take a quick inventory of your life, if you dare, and see where you fall on this list. Where do you end up when life is difficult? What does Mary do? Well, we know. Mary gave the problem to Jesus. Pretty simple, right? Mary gave the problem to Jesus. Now, why do that? That sounds like a Hallmark card. That sounds like something someone would post on Facebook. That sounds just like religious stuff that you say in church, and you leave church, and it never really works. So why give the problem to Jesus? Because Jesus has taken care of your biggest problem. Your biggest problem and my biggest problem would be sin. How do you spell sin? S-I-N. I'm always in the middle of things, and that's the problem. And along with sin comes death and hell. And Jesus of Nazareth has taken care of that biggest problem in your life and mine. How did he do it? He did it by showing us what was ahead of his life in John chapter 2, 1 through 11. Jesus took care of our greatest problem, sin, death, and hell, and he foretold it in this miracle of turning water into wine. So as we see how Jesus took care of the biggest problem, we will have more confidence in giving him all our problems. But brace yourself, as we dig deeper into this first sign in John 2, 1 through 11. There is, here it comes again, some assembly required. Well, this is the first piece. John begins, on the third day, a wedding took place in Cana of Galilee. Now, in studying the Gospel of John, John doesn't give us throwaway terms. Everything is important. So why does he say on the third day? Why not the fourth or the 12th? Why the third day? Later on in this chapter, in John chapter 2, verse 19, Jesus says, destroy this temple, he's speaking about himself, and I will raise it on the third day. So there's something about turning water into wine that corresponds to resurrection and new beginnings and new hope and new life. That's the first piece. The second piece, Jesus calls Mary mother, and then in John 2, verse 4, woman. And now you need to understand that Mary only appears 2 times in John's gospel. Get it? 2 times. Here and at the foot of the cross. And at the foot of the cross, Jesus calls Mary woman. woman. You can look it up in John 19, verse 26. So Mary is at the wedding feast of Cana in Galilee, and she only appears again at the cross, and both times Jesus refers to her as mother, and both times water is involved. Certainly turning water into wine, and at the cross, John 19, verse 34, there's the Roman spear thrust, and there is coming out of our Savior's side a sudden flow of blood and water. So that's the second piece, B. C, Jesus says, my hour is not yet come. 7 times in John's gospel, Jesus speaks about his hour, his time. And all 7 times he speaks about his hour, it's the hour of his death. There's another piece in putting this together, and that would be D. Nearby, John tells us, stood 6. So if you're taking notes, circle the word 6. It's not a throwaway term. It's going to be very important. Why not 8? Why not 3? 6 is the number. 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing. So 6 is the number of imperfection. Right? 7's the perfect number. John loves to use the number 6 to show us that it's imperfect. Classic example, Revelation chapter 13, verse 18. The mark of the beast is what? 6, 6, 6. So whatever is going on with this ceremonial washing in the Old Testament is imperfect. It's not the fulfillment of God's plan for creation. So as Jesus turns water into wine, he is fulfilling and perfecting the way people are washed and cleansed and made new. That's part D. Part E. John concludes this in verse 11 of chapter 2. This, the first of his miraculous signs, Jesus performed at Cana in Galilee and thus revealed his glory. Oh my, the H2O became abundant Merlot. If you would do the math, Jesus just turned 908 bottles of water into 908 bottles of wine. This bride and groom can open their own wine business in Napa Valley. Wow! But that's not the ultimate glory. In John's gospel, mysteriously, paradoxically, the greatest glory of Jesus is his rejection and the spitting and the mocking and the events on Good Friday. You ready to put these pieces together? I must warn you, it's going to take about a month. No, it won't take us a month. Can you start putting the pieces together? So, B, C, and E go together. Everybody got that? So, B takes us to the cross, right? So does C, and so does E. Now, A, of course, takes us to the empty tomb, the third day. Which reminds us that God's final word is never a suffering and death, but God's final word is always the third day, the resurrection. So what puts all this together? That would be D. D. Whatever Jesus is talking about, he's talking about a new cleansing, a new washing. And so we put all of these pieces together and we get something that is absolutely stunningly beautiful. Through Christ's death, right, we've established that, and his resurrection, we are perfectly washed clean of all sin. You see, God has actually taken care of life's biggest problem, sin, and with it, death and hell, and we are washed perfectly. You don't need to live in your past. You need not carry that shame. You are not guilty before the throne of God. What an amazing gift. You are what? Perfectly washed clean of all sin. Now, there's another version to this story. It doesn't appear in the Bible, but it appears in your life and mine, doesn't it? And so this version goes something like this. Mary chews out the groom for poor planning. The groom emotionally wilts and starts crying and carrying on. The bride comes along and says to the groom, if you can't plan a wedding, you certainly can't plan a life together. I'm done. So the guests leave, the marriage is over, and Mary is beside herself. That version doesn't happen in the Bible. But that version happens in your life and mine. It happens when we start putting all of our problems on other people. It happens when we have temper tantrums and hissy fits. It happens when we start focusing on all of our pain and disappointment. So don't take your problems out on other people. Temper tantrums don't advance the cause. Don't take your problems to the bar. Jim Beam cannot solve them. Take your problems to Jesus. That's what Mary did. Take your problems, no matter how small, no matter how big, to Jesus. And I can hear what you're thinking. You're thinking something like this. Pastor Lessing, if I take all my problems to Jesus, the small ones, the medium ones, the big ones, if I take them all to Jesus, I'm going to be talking to Jesus all day long. That would be the point. That would be the point. To talk to Jesus all day long. IKEA furniture seldom works. We have no more wine. M. Scott Peck, life is difficult. These are the facts of life. But there's another fact of life. Jesus says, give me your problem. Trust me completely. Pray to me daily. State the problem clearly. And when we simply do that, in time, we will find ourselves doing what? We will find ourselves lifting a glass of wine and giving praise and thanksgiving to Jesus. Amen.